have a. Now I'm going to begin. Hold on a second here. I got to show this here. Hold on. It's just not the same, huh? And the thing that bothered a lot of AC/DC fans like myself is that they never played Touch Too Much until Axl joined the band. John Bohnenkamp is something now of an ETSU fan, the sports writer voting on the AP poll out of Burlington, Iowa, who included the Bucs as his number 25 team in this week's ballot. So you're something, well, I know that you're a seasoned journalist and a great professional and all that, so calling you a fan, we don't mean to be insulting by any means, but I would ask you there, are you an AC/DC fan?
Some of their stuff, yeah.
I was doing that.
I'm a big guy. I listen to Sirius. I got the Sirius XM in my car. Listen to classic rewind. There's always a lot of stuff on that. A lot of AC/DC stuff on that channel. So yeah, I like it. I like some of their stuff.
The problem with me is that I am a huge Brian Johnson fan, and so this is one of the things when we go off a little bit sometimes in the announcement that Axl, it looks like, is going to be doing not just another tour, but a album with them. But then again, I got to say, he's got the grit and the voice, and he also, and we're really getting off the beaten path here, but yes, this is what I'm passionate about. He also, adds such a legacy to the band being the figure he is. I just wonder, as soon as Angus, if he's ever late for a concert, if he will be, if that's not when a phone call goes to Sarasota and they start saying, Brian, can you do this again? Or can we let bygones be bygones if there are any? Anyway, John Bohnenkamp, let's talk some college basketball. ETSU, your number 25 team in the AP poll. Last time ETSU was in the top 25 was the final poll of 1991 when they were number 17, that team of Alan LaForce that lost to Iowa in the first round of the NCAAs. John Bohnenkamp of the Hawkeye, tell us, why did you vote ETSU in your top 25 this week?
When I'm doing the poll on Sunday night, when I'm sitting there and I'm going through the ballot, and it's gotten, and it seems like this happens earlier every year, it gets to that point when you get to this part of the season where you start looking at teams and everybody's got flaws, everybody's got warts on their resume. And, you vote for teams and they're number 24 one week and then they'll lose 2 games and then you vote them out and a couple weeks later you vote for them again. And you just sit there and so the other night I thought, well, I'm going to, I really want to start looking around and see if, are there some teams out there that we're missing? And, I know ETSU. I know Steve Forbes as well. He's from our area, technically. He grew up about, 60 miles from here. I saw him play high school basketball. That tells you how old we are. So I know they've been playing well, and I start looking at their resume, and you start looking at the fact that they've won 15 in a row. It's been since mid-December since they lost, and they lost the game to a team that was number 5 on my ballot by 2 points. And so you start digging in, and one of the things that I always talk about when people ask me about, why put people in certain places in the poll, I really respect the teams that can win in their conference. And because conference plays a different animal, you can, and because you're playing rivalries, you're playing teams that are familiar with you, you're playing them twice a year in most cases. And so if you're sitting here at this point in the year and you're 12-0 in the league, that to me, I give a lot of respect to those teams, and that to me says those are really good teams. And so, there was a lot of combinations there. I started looking at their NCAA stats. It's one of the best defensive teams in the country. So why not put them in? I think they deserve some recognition for what they've done so far because Steve Forbes has done a great job with this team.
he can be the first coach to get ETSU 3 straight 24 victory seasons. Now they've won, ETSU, and we mentioned this, you remember when they played Iowa in the NCAA tournament. They've been to the tournament 10 times. It's one of the better programs in the Southern Conference historically. But I'm going to ask you, up there in Iowa, John Bohnenkamp, what is your opinion of the Southern Conference?
It's a decent league. I cover, not only do I cover Iowa and the Big Ten, but I cover Western Illinois, who plays in the Summit League. And I don't think people really give a lot of these smaller conferences a lot of credit. There's really good basketball there. And, and that's why you see some of these teams play well in the NCAA tournament and everybody's surprised. Well, you shouldn't be, because there's really good basketball there. And, there is good basketball in the Summit Leagues and in the Southern Conferences of in Division I play. And, like I said, conference plays a whole different animal. And, a few years ago when Wichita State was undefeated at this time, I was voting number one, and at the time Florida was number one. I remember the Wichita State beat writer asked me about it. I'm like, look, you're undefeated in your conference at this point, so those teams get respect from me. And so I do think the Southern's a good league. I think there's a lot of good leagues out there that people just don't recognize because they're smaller conferences. They're in, really small, medium markets, and they don't really, but there's really good basketball on it.
Well, you mentioned Western Illinois, and I know that all 351 Division I's are not created equal, but I often do say, look, Tri-Cities, Tennessee area, we're known in sports for basically two things that are going to make potential national news. One is Bristol Motor Speedway. The other is ETSU, because that's the only entity that could win a championship, be it men's basketball, conceivably the College World Series, that the whole nation would look to. So that's your big league team. It may not be the New York Yankees, but it's ours. And so when I see somebody who's putting ETSU back into the top 25, at least in their poll, they only got the one vote, and it came from John Bohnenkamp in Burlington, Iowa, then I want to take some notice here. Now, have you had a chance to see ETSU play much this year, John Bohnenkamp?
I haven't gotten to watch them, and part of it's just with my schedule and all that. But I follow him, and I follow him a lot because of sports. And like I said, he follows me on Twitter. I follow him. I've known him for a long time. I would talk to him when he was assistant coach at Wichita State. So I haven't seen him, but I'll follow him. I'll keep up to date on how they're playing and that sort of thing. And, like I said, when you really start looking into their numbers, and the other thing is, too, I really respect defensive teams. And it's just something that the last few years of covering college basketball, this is my 25th season, that I really learned to respect those teams that play really good defense. Because there are a lot of, you don't see it a lot anymore. And so when you have teams that play really good defense and you look at their numbers, those are the kind of teams I really like, because those are the kind of teams you don't want to play in a postseason situation. If they know how to lock you down and if they can do things like that. So, just when you just look at the numbers, that's a really good team. And so that I said to me it was like, put them in the poll, because I think they deserve to be there. I think they deserve some recognition for what they've done, because I think this is a really good team.
Well, you mentioned you saw Steve Forbes play high school basketball. I know yesterday in an interview, well, of course, we had him on, and as we do every Monday here on 1420 NBC Sports Radio Tri-Cities at 1 p.m., but he spoke of playing football, and he played baseball collegiately. This might be something of a surprise to someone who sees him today because of his girth, but nevertheless, what do you remember about Steve Forbes, the high school basketball player?
He was on the school. We went to Lone Tree High School, and Lone Tree was a big rival of a Class 1A school, which is the smallest class in Iowa, in our area. So, you knew they always would run into each other at some point on their way to the state tournament. And so, the Forbes name in Lone Tree, there were a lot of great athletes there. And so, those were really good teams that in all sports that he played on. Those, that was like one of the best small schools, especially in eastern Iowa. And so that's how I remember, was when there was some really good basketball, and then there still is, but there was really good basketball, really good small school basketball back then.
Well, we're talking to John Bohnenkamp. He is the Burlington, Iowa sports writer. The name of your publication, I believe, is the Hawkeye, and it is it's a newspaper. It's not, you're not necessarily just covering Iowa Hawkeyes. I mean, you're
no, true story. They stole the nickname from us.
Aha.
1880s. So I always tell people that, but I mean, Iowa City is an hour and 10-minute drive from here. This is primarily an Iowa area. There's some Iowa State fans here, but it's primarily an Iowa area, and so that's and we've had kids from our area play there. Ryan Bowen, played as a 4-year starter, went on to a 10-year NBA career. Jeff Settles is from the area. I covered him in high school and then in college. So, I've covered a lot of games up there, and we're the smallest newspaper that covers them, but we still do what we can in these times. So but we're not just primarily, like I said, I'm an hour away from Western Illinois. I head over there for games. Like I said, I like seeing good basketball.
Well, John Bohnenkamp, talking about the ETSU Buccaneers, you voted them number 25. One of the reasons why, and we had on Howie Schwab yesterday here on Tri-City Sports Now, and he mentioned that, there is actually some weight in a 2-point loss to Xavier. And in fact, pollsters such as John Bohnenkamp and certainly a bracketologist like Howie Schwab are actually weighing that loss ahead of, say, a victory against Savannah State, who may also make the NCAA tournament. They just won't be seated very high, which I found very interesting. But I did want to ask, you mentioned how when Forbes was playing at Lone Tree, he was Lone Tree was something of an overachieving small high school. What position did Steve Forbes play? What kind of a player was he?
If I remember right, he was a guard.
Mm-hmm.
And, back then, you didn't have a lot of big men in this area. And, I remember one of the teams that they played, the one that in our area was really good was Marquette High School. It doesn't exist anymore. It's co-op with a couple other Catholic schools. But that was always kind of the big thing because Marquette had big guys. And so when they would play each other, it was kind of, let's see who could outduel who. And Lone Tree always seemed to get the upper hand on it for the most part. And so, it was a very well-coached team. There were a lot of really good athletes at that time at that school. And it was, like I said, they were the one everybody kind of had to go through. If you wanted to get to state, that was the way it always went, was you went that way to get to state. And, there were a lot of great games that he played in, and his family played in, and it was a big deal back in the early and mid '80s.
Well, let me go back memory lane because you're a native Iowan, and although I know you weren't covering the Iowa Hawkeyes at the time, we did talk a little on social media, and you do remember the time, 1991, the last time that ETSU was nationally ranked, and in a 7-10 game, they lost, I think it was 66-63. A last-second shot didn't go in against the Iowa Hawkeyes in the NCAA tournament. This was a very disappointing loss around here because people thought that year, ETSU, last year of Keith Mr. Jennings, there was some talk about ETSU, which had been ranked as high as number 10 that year, as being a potential Final Four team, like a sleeper, one of those. And that had obviously never happened before. ETSU had made the Sweet 16 in 1968, but the tournament, a lot different back then than it is today and such. From an Iowa standpoint, and I'm going to ask you as someone who, watched Iowa games back then, what are your memories of that game when Iowa knocked off ETSU in the NCAA tournament?
I don't have a whole lot of memories of that game. I remember those teams, though. And I remember those Iowa teams back then. That was Tom Davis. It would have been his, that would have been his 5th season, I believe. And, this was a very athletic team. This was a team that really liked to press. They were a hard team to defend. They were a hard team to play against back then. And I remember because that was one of those years they always seemed to run into Duke at some point, and in the NCAA tournament. So that's one of the things I remember was those were the years when they would win a first-round game, and then there'd be a second-round game against Duke somewhere. And so, like I said, those were fun times here because, I mean, like I said, they were Iowa's a really fun team to watch with the way they pressed and the way they ran and all that. And that was, you know, a team with a really young Chris Street. We just had they just had this was the 25th anniversary of when he was killed in a car accident during his junior season. And, you know, so that's kind of how I kind of remember those teams. And, you know, they were really good. They were really talented and really deep, if I remember. And they were fun to watch. They were fun to be around.
Well, I will say that back in those days, I remember a few years before, I think it was 87 or so, Iowa, for one poll, was ranked number 1 in the country. And there was quite a rivalry at that time with Indiana, who won a national championship in 87. And ironically, their star player, Steve Alford, would go on to coach the Hawkeyes for a while. So
I covered all the Alford years.
Anyways, John Bohnenkamp, he voted ETSU number 25 in the country. And, well, what do they got to do against VMI for you to get your vote again?
Well, just keep winning. And it's, you know, and I mean, I look through their schedule and I look through the Ken Palm predictions and I don't see why they can't. And I don't see why they can't run the tape. There's some tough road games coming up, but I think that you know, that again, as long as they keep winning, they'll stay in there.
ETSU favored to win every game left on the schedule according to TeamRankings.com. He's John Bohnenkamp. Read him in the Hawkeye up in Burlington, Iowa. He's voting ETSU number 25. Chris Lowe of ESPN is covering ETSU for some stories for the tournament. We talk to him next on Tri-City Sports Now.